Hello YouTube, this is that Yi guy. Today I have for you a very requested video on the combat stats in Lost Ark. Now let's quickly go over each stat. So the stats actually increase, for example, attack speed, movement speed, cooldown in a linear fashion. So each point of your stat will give you the same amount of the effect. Each point of crit will give you this crit chance. If you want to know how much you can get from 1,000 crit stat, you're going to simply multiply it by 1,000. So specialization is something that's trickiest. Depends on what classes you're playing. For example, if you're playing Demon Form Shadow Hunter, if you're playing Igniter Sorcerers, if you're playing Surge Deathblade, pretty much anything that heavily depends on you charging the meter to a full to do the most of damage, to transform into something else, you will want specialization over anything else. Because just for example, Demon Hunter Specialization, if you have 1,000 points into it, it will make you charge the meter 71% faster. It will make the duration of your transform 42% longer, and it makes all the damage you do in the transformation 86% higher. So all three of this just multiplies the effectiveness of your transformation over and over again. That makes it so effective that you just want specialization over anything else for classes that fully utilizes this stats. For majority of the classes, such as Berserker, Reflux Sorcerers, we don't really need specialization. That leaves us, if we're DPS, with Swiftness and Crit. If you have a base crit multiplier of 200%, which every class does, but some classes run other things like King Blunt, for example, that will increase the crit damage by 50%. That raises it all the way to 250. That messes with the math a little bit. But from almost every class, crit damage will just mean that each percent crit chance will give you 1% DPS increase if nothing changes your crit damage. So this is very easy to calculate. Because of this, we can also know that we're going to need 28 points into crit to get 1% of crit chance. So 28 points into crit will give us 1% DPS increase. Now for Swiftness, this is slightly more complicated because it is hard to calculate exactly how much more damage you get out of attack speed and movement speed, because most of the time we're limited by our cooldowns, because skills will do majority of the damage that your class can do. Now, if we just look at cooldown reduction, it doesn't scale linearly. Based on the reduction, the actual DPS increase from how often you can use the skill is going to scale differently. So if you have 20% cooldown reduction, you can actually use the skill 25% more often. If you have a 40% cooldown reduction, you can actually use the skill 65% more often. So the easy way to think about this is that the more you stack the swiftness and cooldown reduction, the more effective it is. Now, it's hard to calculate the exact number, but I estimated it based on how much attack speed and movement speed is going to help you reposition, save your time, things like that. So very roughly, you can translate it to around 30.66 points into swiftness will give you 1% DPS increase. So if we look at it like this, they are very similar in terms of the effect that gives you. So if you're a class that runs either crit or swiftness, it really depends on your playstyle or whether or not you're going to have too much crit from everything else. So these two are actually quite comparable in terms of stats. It's domination, endurance, and expertise. Now, almost no one runs this because domination and expertise, even though it looks really good, damage to push or staggered targets will increase by a significant amount. If we look at the percentage, it's actually way better than swiftness or crit. But the problem is the debuffs that we're talking about are actually about stun, freeze, electrocute, or push will be knock up or knock downs. They do not work on bosses or raid guardians and things like that. So domination is not going to help you in most of the content that you run. And expertise, it's the same problem. Because you can't apply those stuns, debuffs on the bosses, it's not going to help you much at all. Now, endurance is potentially good for support, but most supports opt to have more cooldown reduction so they can spam the support skills better. But if you need the defenses on some support, it is okay to have some endurance. Question that I get asked a lot is if you're buying, say, a legendary accessory in tier 3, should you prioritize the correct combat stats or should you prioritize the right engravings? For example, if you were to shop for something that's going to be perfect for your class, having the crit, Mayhem 3, and Curse Doll 3, for example, the price will be really high. Now, if you dropped either the Curse Doll or the crit as a search requirement, you can get the same piece for almost dirt cheap. So say we don't look for crit, you can get anything like this for say 25 gold or even cheaper. The same thing is if you drop the other one, you could drop the engraving, which is that one. You can still have a primary stat of Mayhem 3, but you're gonna just get crit and not have the engraving. You can pick up the pieces like this also extremely cheap. So some people are asking which one should you sacrifice if you have to sacrifice it to budget reasons. So the TLDR is if you don't want to watch the rest of the video, it is always better mathematically to focus on having the right stats. So if you don't have the right stats, the engravings won't help you as much. Now that we have these numbers, we can actually translate this into the stats we get from jewelries. So on the necklace, we get total of roughly 850 stat on a legendary tier 3 piece of jewelry. On a tier 3 legendary earring, we're gonna get roughly 240. On a ring, that's roughly 160. So because we know how much DPS increase these stats translate into, we can actually take a look and see that having the right stats on these pieces versus having the wrong stats, such as if you're just having expertise, domination, endurance, even if you have a perfect engravings, you're gonna miss out on these damage increases. So because of this stat, necklace will give us 26% DPS increase. Because of earring, we're going to get 16% damage increase. Because of a ring on the right stats, we're going to have 11% DPS increase. So that's going to give us roughly 53% increased damage if we have all the right stats. So say instead of having a Curse Doll, all 15 points, I would just end up not having it. Or instead of having Grudge 15 points, I end up not having this. So the only difference that the engraving will make is the 16 to 20% at most. So as you can see, it's much better to focus on having the right stats in order to maximize how effective your character is. So this was very requested both on the polls I put in the community and just from people asking me. And I hope this is interesting information and helpful to some of you. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.